I never believed in ghosts, at least not until we moved into that old country house. It was supposed to be a fresh start for me and Anna. We were tired of the noisy city, the traffic, the stress. When we found this beautiful old house online, it seemed perfect, peaceful, quiet, just what we needed. The day we arrived, the sun was setting. The house looked even better than in the pictures. 2 stories tall, with faded white paint and dark green shutters. A huge oak tree stood in the front yard, its branches reaching out like welcoming arms. As we got out of the car, I noticed something odd. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. I shook it off. Just nerves about the big move, I told myself. Anna squeezed my hand. "Ready for our new adventure, Joao?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I nodded, forcing a smile. Ready as I'll ever be. We walked up to the front door. The key was old and rusty, and it took some jiggling to get it to turn. Finally, with a loud creak, the door swung open. The inside of the house was dark and musty. I fumbled for a light switch, but nothing happened when I flipped it. "Guess the power's not on yet," I muttered. "I'll call the electric company tomorrow." We used our phone flashlights to look around. The house was fully furnished, just like the ad said. Old-fashioned furniture covered in white sheets, faded paintings on the walls, a thick layer of dust everywhere. As we explored, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see someone standing there, but it was always just shadows. We decided to camp out in the living room for the night. As we set up our sleeping bags, I heard something. A whisper so faint I almost missed it. "Did you say something?" I asked Anna. She shook her head. "No." "Why?" "Nothing," I said. "Must be the wind." But deep down, I knew it wasn't the wind. And as we settled in for our first night in our new home, I couldn't help but wonder, what have we gotten ourselves into? Sleep didn't come easy that first night. Every creak and groan of the old house jolted me awake. But it wasn't just the unfamiliar sounds keeping me up. It was that feeling that we weren't alone. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep. Careful not to wake Anna, I got up and decided to explore a bit more. The house was different in the dark. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my eyes. The air felt colder, heavier. I made my way to the kitchen, my phone's flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I reached for a glass in the cupboard, I heard it again. A whisper right behind me. "Welcome home." I spun around, heart racing. But there was no one there, just the empty kitchen, bathed in the pale light of my phone. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. I told myself I was imagining things. Lack of sleep, stress from the move, it was playing tricks on my mind. But then why did my skin feel like it was crawling? As I turned to head back to the living room, something caught my eye. On the dusty kitchen table, there was a single, fresh fingerprint. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Anna's. My hands trembled as I lifted the phone to get a better look. But as the light hit the table, the fingerprint vanished, like it had never been there at all. I practically ran back to Anna, my heart pounding. She was still asleep, peaceful. I envied her calm. As I slipped back into my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd made a terrible mistake. Morning came too slowly. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the windows, I finally dozed off. But even in my dreams, I couldn't escape. I saw shadowy figures moving through the house, whispering my name, calling me to join them. When Anna shook me awake a few hours later, I was drenched in sweat. "João, are you okay?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "You were talking in your sleep. Something about whispers." I forced a smile. "Just a weird dream," I lied. "This old house must be getting to me." Anna laughed. "Don't tell me you're getting spooked already. Come on, let's have some breakfast and start unpacking. It'll feel more like home in no time." As we ate our makeshift breakfast of granola bars, I wanted to tell Anna about what I'd experienced. About the whispers, the fingerprint, the overwhelming feeling of being watched. But I couldn't bring myself to worry her. Not yet. Besides, maybe it was all in my head. Maybe once we got the house cleaned up and settled in, these strange feelings would go away. But as Anna chatted excitedly about our plans for the day, I couldn't help but wonder, what other secrets was this house hiding, and how long before we found out? The next few days were a blur of unpacking and cleaning. We threw open all the windows, letting fresh air chase away the musty smell. Slowly, the house started to feel more like ours, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my gut since that first night. It was on the fourth day that we made the discovery. Anna and I were in the master bedroom, moving a heavy old wardrobe. As we pushed it away from the wall, I noticed something odd. "Wait," I said, squinting at the wall behind it. "Does that look like a door to you?" Anna leaned in closer. "You're right. It's painted over, but I can see the outline." Excitement pushed aside my fears. A hidden door. Maybe this old house had some cool secrets after all. We spent the next hour carefully scraping away the paint. Finally, with a creak that echoed through the house, the door swung open. Behind it was a small room no bigger than a closet. It was empty except for a single item on the floor, an old, leather-bound book. Anna reached for it, but I grabbed her wrist. "Wait," I said. "Maybe we shouldn't touch it." She laughed. "Come on, Joao. Don't tell me you're still spooked. It's just an old book." Before I could stop her, she picked it up. As soon as her fingers touched the cover, a cold wind whipped through the room. The door slammed shut behind us. Anna screamed, dropping the book. It fell open, pages fluttering in the sudden wind. And then, as quickly as it started, everything went still. We stood there, hearts pounding, staring at the book on the floor. Its pages had settled open to a handwritten entry. May 15th, 1923. They're here again. The whispers, the shadows. They want something from us, from this house. I fear we've awakened something that should have stayed buried. If you're reading this, get out while you still can. Anna's face had gone pale. "Joao," she whispered. "What is this?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The words on the page seemed to dance, to whisper, calling to me. Suddenly, Anna gasped. "Look!" She pointed at the far wall of the tiny room. Words were appearing, as if being written by an invisible hand. "Welcome to our home. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave." I grabbed Anna's hand. "We need to get out of here, now." We ran from the room, slamming the door behind us. As we stood in the bedroom, catching our breath, Anna turned to me with fear in her eyes. "Joao," she said, I think this house is haunted." I nodded slowly, the reality of our situation sinking in. "I think you're right, and I think we're in serious trouble." As if in response, a low moan echoed through the house. The whispers I'd been hearing grew louder, more insistent. We were no longer alone in our new home, and whatever was with us, it knew we were here. After discovering the hidden room, Anna and I couldn't ignore the strange occurrences anymore. We sat down in the living room, the old leather book between us, and tried to make sense of what was happening. "We should leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Pack up and go back to the city." Anna shook her head. "We can't just run away, Joao. This is our home now. We need to figure out what's going on." As if on cue, the lights flickered. A chill ran down my spine. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's read through this book. Maybe it can tell us something about the history of this place." We spent the next few hours poring over the journal. It belonged to a man named Eduardo who had lived in the house in the 1920s. His entries started normal enough, talking about his family and daily life. But as we read on, things took a dark turn. Eduardo wrote about hearing whispers, seeing shadows move on their own. He described a growing sense of dread, like the house itself was alive and hungry. The last entry made my blood run cold. "They're coming for us tonight. I can feel it. The shadows are closing in. If anyone finds this, please don't make our mistake. Don't try to uncover the secrets of this house. Some things are meant to stay buried." As I read the final words aloud, the book slammed shut on its own. Anna screamed, jumping back. Suddenly, the room grew cold, so cold I could see my breath. The whispers I'd been hearing grew louder, turning into a chorus of disembodied voices. "You shouldn't be here," they seemed to say. "This is our home." Objects started flying off shelves. Pictures fell from walls. In the chaos, I grabbed Anna's hand and ran for the front door. But it wouldn't open. No matter how hard we pulled, it stayed firmly shut. "The windows!" Anna yelled over the noise. We ran to the nearest window, but it was like they were painted on. We couldn't break them, couldn't open them. As we stood there, panic rising, the whispers grew louder. Shadows began to take shape around us. Vague, human-like forms, reaching out with wispy hands. "What do you want?" I shouted, pulling Anna close. The shadows paused. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, they spoke. "We want you." The room started spinning. I felt lightheaded, like I was falling into a deep, dark pit. The last thing I heard before everything went black was Anna screaming my name. When I came to, I was lying on the living room floor. Anna was shaking me, tears streaming down her face. João, wake up." I sat up slowly, my head pounding. What happened?" Anna helped me to my feet. "You collapsed. The shadows, they tried to take you. I thought I'd lost you." I looked around. The room was a mess, but the oppressive atmosphere was gone. "For now, we need help," I said, my voice hoarse. "This is bigger than us." Anna nodded, her face pale but determined. "I know someone, a friend of a friend who deals with paranormal stuff. I'll call her." As Anna went to make the call, I sank into a chair, exhausted. We were in over our heads, that much was clear. But one thought kept running through my mind. What if it was already too late to escape? The next morning, we were both exhausted and on edge. Neither of us had slept much, jumping at every creak and whisper. The house felt different now, alive, watching, waiting. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Anna and I exchanged nervous glances before I went to answer it. Standing on our porch was a woman in her 50s, with long silver hair and piercing green eyes. She smiled warmly, but there was a hint of concern in her gaze. "Hello," she said. "I'm Dona Clara. Anna called me about your situation." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you for coming. Please, come in." As Dona Clara stepped into the house, she paused, her eyes scanning the room. "Oh my," she murmured. "This place is very active." Anna joined us, relief evident on her face. "Dona Clara, thank you so much for coming on such short notice." The medium nodded, her expression serious. "Of course, from what you told me on the phone, this isn't something that should wait." We led her to the living room, where the journal still lay on the coffee table. As soon as Dona Clara saw it, she gasped. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I explained about the hidden room and what had happened when we opened the book. Dona Clara listened intently, her frown deepening with each word. "This house," she said finally, "is what we call a focal point, a place where the veil between our world and the spirit world is thin. And this book, it's a key of sorts. By reading it, you've opened a door that was meant to stay closed." A chill ran down my spine. "Can you close it?" Dona Clara sighed. "It's not that simple. The spirits here are strong, angry. They've been trapped for a long time, and now they see you as a way out." "Out?" Anna asked, her voice shaking. "What do you mean?" "They want to possess you," Dona Clara said bluntly. "Use your bodies to escape this house." The room fell silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "What can we do?" I finally managed to ask. Dona Clara stood up. "First, we need to cleanse this house. Then, we'll perform a ritual to send these spirits back where they belong and seal the doorway." She reached into her bag and pulled out various items. Candles, herbs, a small bottle of what looked like water. "This won't be easy," she warned. "The spirits will fight back. Are you prepared for that?" Anna and I looked at each other. Despite the fear, I saw determination in her eyes. I nodded. "We're ready," Anna said. "Just tell us what to do." As Dona Clara began setting up for the ritual, the air in the house grew heavy. The whispers, which had been quiet since the medium arrived, started up again, louder and angrier than before. Objects began to rattle. The temperature dropped suddenly, our breath visible in the cold air. Donna Clara's voice cut through the chaos. "It's starting," she said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and excitement. "Whatever happens, whatever you see or hear, don't stop the ritual. And most importantly, don't let them take you." As she began to chant in a language I didn't understand, the house seemed to come alive around us. This was it, our final stand against the spirits of the House of Whispers. And I knew, deep in my bones, that not all of us might make it out alive. Have you ever felt like you're being watched? That creepy sensation that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up? Well, that's how I felt every time I stepped into the elevator at Blackwood Towers. My name's Alex, and I've been the night security guard at this old apartment building for about 6 months now. It's not a bad gig, mostly quiet, decent pay. But lately, things have been weird. It all started 3 weeks ago. I was doing my usual rounds when I got a call from Mrs. Peterson on the 7th floor. She was in a panic, saying her husband hadn't come home from work. Now, normally I'd tell her to call the police, but Mr. Peterson was like clockwork. Home every day at 6 p.m. sharp. It was now 11 p.m., and he was nowhere to be found. I decided to check the security footage. Sure enough, there was Mr. Peterson entering the building at his usual time. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and stepped inside when the doors opened. But here's the thing, he never came out. I watched that footage a dozen times. The elevator went up to the 7th floor, the doors opened, but Mr. Peterson wasn't there. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The police were baffled. They searched the entire building, even the elevator shaft. Nothing. Mr. Peterson had simply disappeared. Over the next few weeks, it happened again and again. 3 more residents, all vanishing without a trace. And every time, the last place they were seen was in that elevator. People started talking. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the building was cursed. Others whispered about ghosts or aliens. But me, I knew there had to be a logical explanation. I just had to find it. So here I am, standing in front of the elevator on my midnight shift. The brass doors gleam in the dim hallway light, almost mocking me. I take a deep breath and press the call button. The elevator dings, and the doors slide open with a soft whoosh. It's empty just like always, but something feels off. The air inside feels heavy, charged with something I can't explain. I step in, my heart pounding. As the doors close behind me, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone, that something is watching me, waiting. I press the button for the top floor. The elevator starts to move, and I hold my breath. Will I make it to my destination, or will I be the next to disappear? As the floor numbers tick by, I realize I might be in over my head. But I'm determined to solve this mystery, no matter what. The elevator keeps rising, and I can't help but wonder, what secrets does it hold? And more importantly, will I live long enough to find out? The elevator climbed higher, each floor ticking by with a soft ding. My palms were sweaty, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. 10th floor, 11th floor, 12th floor. Wait a minute. Blackwood Towers only has 12 floors. So why was the elevator still going up? I watched in disbelief as the number changed to 13. That's impossible, I thought. There is no 13th floor. The elevator came to a smooth stop, and the doors slid open with that familiar whoosh. But what I saw outside those doors made my blood run cold. It wasn't a hallway or an apartment. It was nothing, just an inky, swirling darkness that seemed to go on forever. And from somewhere in that darkness, I heard whispers, faint at first but growing louder. "Alex," they seemed to say. "Come join us, Alex." I stumbled backward, pressing myself against the elevator wall. This couldn't be real. I must be dreaming, right? But then I saw something in the darkness, a figure walking towards the elevator. As it got closer, I realized with a jolt that it was Mr. Peterson. He looked exactly the same as the day he disappeared, right down to his red tie and briefcase. "Mr. Peterson?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is that really you?" He stopped at the threshold of the elevator, his eyes blank and unfocused. When he spoke, his voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from far away. "It's nice here, Alex," he said. "Why don't you come see for yourself?" He reached out his hand, inviting me to step into the darkness with him. For a moment, I was tempted. What secrets would I uncover if I went with him? But then I remembered the other missing residents. Mrs. Liu from the 3rd floor, the twins from 9B. If I stepped out there, would I disappear too? I lunged for the control panel, desperately hitting the close door button. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Mr. Peterson's hand inched closer. Then, finally, the doors began to close. Just before they shut completely, I saw Mr. Peterson's face change. His blank expression morphed into something angry, almost inhuman. The elevator started moving down, and I collapsed to the floor, my legs shaking too much to hold me up. What had I just seen? Was that really Mr. Peterson, or something pretending to be him? When the doors opened again, I was back in the lobby. Everything looked normal, like nothing had happened. But I knew the truth now. The elevator wasn't just a machine. It was a portal to somewhere else. As I stumbled out into the lobby, my mind was racing. I had to tell someone, had to get help. But who would believe me? I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, ready to call the police, my boss, anyone. But then I stopped. What if they thought I was crazy? What if they fired me? No, I realized, if I was going to solve this mystery and save the missing residents, I had to do it myself. I looked back at the elevator, its doors now closed, looking as innocent as ever. But I knew better. Whatever was going on, whatever that 13th floor was, I was going to figure it out. Little did I know, my troubles were just beginning. And the elevator? It was waiting for me, ready for round 2. The next few nights were a blur. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that inky darkness, heard those whispers calling my name. But I had to keep it together. I had a job to do. I spent my shifts watching the elevator like a hawk. I checked the security footage over and over, looking for any clue I might have missed. But it was always the same. People went in, the elevator went up, and sometimes they just didn't come back out. It was on the 4th night that things got even weirder. I was doing my usual rounds when I heard the elevator ding. It was 3 a.m. Nobody should be using the elevator at this hour. I rushed to the lobby, my heart in my throat. The doors were just closing as I got there. And that's when I saw it, a glimpse of a face in the gap. It was Mrs. Liu, the woman who had vanished from the 3rd floor last week. Without thinking, I jammed my foot in the door, forcing it open. Mrs. Liu stood there, looking exactly as she had the day she disappeared. But something was off. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, just like Mr. Peterson's had been. "Mrs. Liu," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is that really you?" She turned to look at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Her mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was deep, echoing, like multiple voices speaking at once. "We are many," it said, "and we are hungry." I stumbled backward, my heart racing. Mrs. Liu, or whatever was wearing her face, stepped forward. The air around her seemed to shimmer and distort. "Join us, Alex," the voice said. "There's so much more to see." I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but I was frozen in place, unable to look away from those empty eyes. Suddenly, the lights in the lobby flickered. In that split second of darkness, I felt something cold brush against my arm. When the lights came back on, Mrs. Liu was gone. The elevator doors were closed. I stood there, shaking, for what felt like hours. What had I just seen? What did it mean? As the sun began to rise, casting an eerie glow through the lobby windows, I made a decision. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I needed help. There was an old man who lived on the 5th floor, Mr. Kaplan. He'd been in Blackwood Towers longer than anyone else. If anyone knew the building's secrets, it would be him. As I rode the elevator up to the 5th floor, taking the stairs was not an option I was willing to consider. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The elevator seemed to move slower than usual, each floor passing with agonizing slowness. When I finally reached the 5th floor, I practically ran to Mr. Kaplan's door. I knocked, probably louder than I should have at 6 a.m. After a moment, I heard shuffling footsteps. The door creaked open, and Mr. Kaplan peered out at me, his bushy eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Alex?" he said, his voice gravelly with sleep. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. "Mr. Kaplan," I said, "I need to talk to you about the elevator. I think it's alive, and I think it's hungry." Mr. Kaplan's eyes widened. For a moment, I thought he was going to slam the door in my face, but then he nodded slowly. "I was wondering when someone would finally notice," he said, opening the door wider. "Come in, Alex. We have a lot to talk about." As I stepped into his apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a point of no return. Whatever Mr. Kaplan was about to tell me, I knew it would change everything. And somewhere in the building, I could swear I heard the faint ding of an elevator, waiting patiently for its next passenger. Mr. Kaplan's apartment was like stepping into a different era. Faded wallpaper, antique furniture, and shelves lined with old books. But what caught my eye was a large cork board on one wall, covered in newspaper clippings, photographs, and hastily scribbled notes. "You've been investigating the elevator," I said, not really a question. Mr. Kaplan nodded, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "For decades, my boy. Sit down. This might take a while." The elevator doors beckoned, a gaping maw of darkness. I could feel the whispers calling to me, a siren song that tugged at the edges of my mind. But I steeled my resolve, gripping the bag of supplies Mr. Kaplan had given me. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Kaplan nodded, his eyes filled with a grim determination. "We have no choice, Alex. The portal must be closed, no matter the cost." With a deep breath, we stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut behind us, sealing us in. The air felt thick, heavy with a palpable sense of dread. "Hold on to the book," Mr. Kaplan instructed, "and don't let go, no matter what happens." As the elevator began its ascent, the floor numbers ticked by. 1, 2, 3. Each ding sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the bag of supplies, reassuring myself that we had the tools to protect us. Then the elevator stopped. The doors didn't open, but I knew we had reached our destination, the 13th floor. "This is it," Mr. Kaplan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get ready." The doors slid open, revealing the same inky, swirling darkness I had seen before. But this time, I could feel an overwhelming sense of malice, of hunger, emanating from it. Mr. Kaplan began to chant, his words flowing in a language I didn't recognize. As he spoke, he sprinkled a line of salt across the threshold of the elevator, creating a barrier. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of disembodied voices. I could feel them pressing against the salt line, like they were testing the strength of our defenses. "You cannot stop us," the voices hissed. "We will have you both." Mr. Kaplan's chanting grew more intense, his voice rising in volume. I gripped the leather-bound journal, my knuckles white. Then, without warning, a shadowy figure materialized in the darkness. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were indistinct, constantly shifting and distorting. "You dare to challenge us?" the figure boomed, its voice echoing through the small space of the elevator. "Your feeble attempts are futile." It reached out a clawed hand, and I felt an icy chill grip my heart. The salt line began to sizzle and smoke, and I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. "Now, Alex," Mr. Kaplan shouted, opening the journal to a marked page. "Read the incantation quickly." I didn't hesitate. I began to read the words, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. As I spoke, I could feel the air in the elevator shift, the pressure changing. The shadowy figure let out an unearthly shriek, recoiling from the power of the ritual. The salt line flared brightly, holding back the darkness. "Keep going," Mr. Kaplan urged, his own voice strained with the effort. I continued reading, the words flowing from the page as if guided by some unseen force. The air grew charged, electricity crackling around us. Suddenly, the darkness seemed to collapse in on itself, swirling and contracting. A deafening roar filled the elevator, and I had to resist the urge to cover my ears. Then, with a final, agonizing scream, the figure vanished, consumed by the vortex of energy. The doors slammed shut, and the elevator began its descent, the floor numbers ticking by rapidly. Mr. Kaplan and I stood there, breathless, staring at the closed doors. The air felt lighter, the oppressive presence gone. "We did it," Mr. Kaplan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The portal is closed." I let out a shaky breath, my legs trembling. But at what cost? As the elevator reached the lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had been lurking in the darkness, it was still out there, waiting. And I knew, deep down, that it would only be a matter of time before it found a way back. That I sank into an old armchair. Mr. Kaplan began his tale. "Blackwood Towers wasn't always called that," he said. "It was built in 1920 by a man named Ezra Blackwood. He was, let's say, interested in things beyond our understanding." Mr. Kaplan pulled an old photograph from the board. It showed a stern-looking man standing in front of the building. There was something unsettling about his eyes. "Blackwood believed he could create a portal to other dimensions," Mr. Kaplan continued, "and he succeeded, but not in the way he expected." My mind was reeling. "The elevator," I whispered. "Exactly," Mr. Kaplan said. "Blackwood used the elevator shaft as the focal point for his experiments. But something went wrong. The portal opened, all right, but what came through?" He trailed off, lost in thought. I leaned forward, hanging on every word. "What came through, Mr. Kaplan?" He looked at me, his eyes haunted. "Hunger," he said simply. "A hunger that can never be satisfied." It latched onto the elevator, using it as a conduit to our world. I thought about the missing residents, about Mrs. Liu's empty eyes. "It's been feeding on people," I realized, feeling sick. Mr. Kaplan nodded grimly. "For almost 100 years. It takes them to a place between worlds, a void where time and space don't exist as we know them." "But why now?" I asked. "Why are more people disappearing lately?" "It's getting stronger," Mr. Kaplan said. "The more it feeds, the more powerful it becomes. And I fear it's preparing for something big." Just then, we heard a ding from the hallway. The elevator had arrived on our floor. We both froze, listening. The doors slid open with that familiar whoosh, but no one got out. Instead, we heard whispers, dozens of voices calling out, "Alex, Mr. Kaplan, come join us." Mr. Kaplan sprang into action with surprising agility for his age. He grabbed a bag from under his desk and thrust it into my hands. "Salt, iron filings, blessed candles," he explained quickly. "They'll protect you, but not for long. We need to end this, Alex. Tonight." I nodded, my heart racing. "How?" Mr. Kaplan pulled an old, leather-bound book from his shelf. "With this, Blackwood's journal. It has the ritual to close the portal, but it has to be done from inside the elevator, at the exact spot where the portal opens." The whispers were getting louder. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, our breath visible in the air. "We have to go," Mr. Kaplan said urgently. "Are you ready, Alex? Once we start this, there's no turning back." I looked at the door, knowing what waited for us in the hallway. I was terrified, but I thought about all the people who had disappeared, about Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Liu, and all the others trapped in that void. I turned back to Mr. Kaplan and nodded. "I'm ready." As we stepped out into the hallway, facing the open elevator doors and the swirling darkness beyond, I realized this was it, the final confrontation. Whatever happened next would determine not just our fate, but the fate of everyone in Blackwood Towers. and possibly the world. The elevator was waiting, and this time we were going to ride it all the way to the end. The elevator doors beckoned, a gaping maw of darkness. I could feel the whispers calling to me, a siren song that tugged at the edges of my mind. But I steeled my resolve, gripping the bag of supplies Mr. Kaplan had given me. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Kaplan nodded, his eyes filled with a grim determination. "We have no choice, Alex. The portal must be closed, no matter the cost." With a deep breath, we stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut behind us, sealing us in. The air felt thick, heavy with a palpable sense of dread. "Hold on to the book," Mr. Kaplan instructed, "and don't let go, no matter what happens." As the elevator began its ascent, the floor numbers ticked by. 1, 2, 3. Each ding sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the bag of supplies, reassuring myself that we had the tools to protect us. Then the elevator stopped. The doors didn't open, but I knew we had reached our destination, the 13th floor. "This is it," Mr. Kaplan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get ready." The doors slid open, revealing the same inky, swirling darkness I had seen before. But this time, I could feel an overwhelming sense of malice, of hunger, emanating from it. Mr. Kaplan began to chant, his words flowing in a language I didn't recognize. As he spoke, he sprinkled a line of salt across the threshold of the elevator, creating a barrier. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of disembodied voices. I could feel them pressing against the salt line, like they were testing the strength of our defenses. "You cannot stop us," the voices hissed. "We will have you both." Mr. Kaplan's chanting grew more intense, his voice rising in volume. I gripped the leather-bound journal, my knuckles white. Then, without warning, a shadowy figure materialized in the darkness. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were indistinct, constantly shifting and distorting. "You dare to challenge us?" the figure boomed, its voice echoing through the small space of the elevator. "Your feeble attempts are futile." It reached out a clawed hand, and I felt an icy chill grip my heart. The salt line began to sizzle and smoke, and I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. "Now, Alex," Mr. Kaplan shouted, opening the journal to a marked page. "Read the incantation quickly." I didn't hesitate. I began to read the words, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. As I spoke, I could feel the air in the elevator shift, the pressure changing. The shadowy figure let out an unearthly shriek, recoiling from the power of the ritual. The salt line flared brightly, holding back the darkness. "Keep going," Mr. Kaplan urged, his own voice strained with the effort. I continued reading, the words flowing from the page as if guided by some unseen force. The air grew charged, electricity crackling around us. Suddenly, the darkness seemed to collapse in on itself, swirling and contracting. A deafening roar filled the elevator, and I had to resist the urge to cover my ears. Then, with a final, agonizing scream, the figure vanished, consumed by the vortex of energy. The doors slammed shut, and the elevator began its descent, the floor numbers ticking by rapidly. Mr. Kaplan and I stood there, breathless, staring at the closed doors. The air felt lighter, the oppressive presence gone. "We did it," Mr. Kaplan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The portal is closed." I let out a shaky breath, my legs trembling. But at what cost? As the elevator reached the lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had been lurking in the darkness, it was still out there, waiting. And I knew deep down that it would only be a matter of time before it found a way back.